Hello, friends. My name is Steve, and we're here today to discuss the first book in the Song of Ice and Fire, which is A Game of Thrones. We're here with some friends today, and we'll be discussing the book. Full spoilers, so if you're one of those people who somehow have avoided spoilers for this series all these years, then beware. So we're going to spoil it for you. So we'll go ahead and go around the room and give some introductions. Chris, will you start us off, please?
Yes, my name's Chris Moen, sometimes booktuber, sometimes appear in Steve's streams, sometimes on the forums on PFG, etc. And this is the only book of the series that's a reread for me. So this was a reread, but it turns out rereads are very unreliable, as I found out.
And Susanna?
My name is Susan Imaginário. I write fantasy, and this is the first time that I've joined any sort of book discussions. I'm very excited about it. Let's see how it goes.
We're a pretty rough group. I don't know. You have to be careful. We're pretty dangerous.
Yeah.
But your troublemakers are in here. But glad to have you. Glad you can make it.
Yeah, welcome.
And Layla?
I'm Layla Goshi. I'm an English professor, and I just launched a web magazine called Ballady Magazine that focuses on sci-fi fantasy, especially in translation from other languages.
And Yulene?
Hi everyone. So I am Yolene. I have a small booktube channel called Yolene Reads. I talk a lot about fantasy. And I have been saying for the longest time that The Song of Ice and Fire is my favorite series of all time, but it has been a decade since I read it. So I'm currently working through my reread, and I am happy to say that I'm still enjoying it. But yeah, I'm very curious to hear what first-time readers are talking about and if they like it or not. So yeah, very curious for the discussion.
Yeah, I guess I should mention I've seen the TV show, I don't know, 3 times from beginning to end, and we won't get into that too much, but we'll get distracted talking about the end of that series. But so this is my first time reading it, and I was surprised how quick I went through it. Just because you kind of knew what was going to happen, but there's some small differences, but it was enough to keep me interested. Who else had that same experience? Or is it my the only
it was
first
the
time?
same for me.
Yeah, it's an interesting experience. Again, reread, haven't watched the TV show, all that kind of stuff. When you aren't waiting on the surprises, which the first time you read through is pretty much the thing that you take away from the book is the events that happen and the surprising things that happen. Now to kind of know what's going to happen and kind of concentrate then on the build up and how it shapes to get to that point. The things that we see kind of like on screen or you're told about in the book, and then the things that obviously happen off screen and that kind of thing, all that stuff that happens. So it was interesting to read. It kind of lacks rereads. I don't do an awful lot of, but they lack a bit of pace then for me because you're not kind of drawn to, oh God, what happens? It's just kind of like enjoying the experience rather than kind of having that drive. I don't know if anybody else found that.
I find myself noticing little details that I didn't before, and knowing the story. I find myself kind of giggling a bit. Oh, that was very clever. Oh, you mentioned this here. I didn't realize that. Things that at first read seemed completely, irrelevant, almost fillers. And you go like, aha, this is going to be important 3 books later. So it's very... It's been fun from a writing perspective.
There's a couple of things that even kind of took me into the TV show. The TV show we watched recently, the Fire and Blood, or I've already forget the name.
House of the Dragon.
Yeah. So that House of the Dragon. Sorry, jeez, it's early. Sorry. But yeah, so it was lots of fun, but there were a couple of characters that I felt were worse in the books than they were in the show. It kind of felt like in the TV show, I think it was like I'm having a brain fart here. Sorry. Cersei was worse in the books. I think in the show she gets worse, but I think initially she's a little sympathetic, but I think she was worse in the books. Just to start off with, anyway.
I agree.
Yeah, I agree.
Hmm.
I think,
She was very well cast for the series. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
oh, yes, I agree. You know, I had read the book somewhere way back before the show started, but it made no impression on me whatsoever, you know, and then I didn't even watch the first season of the show. But then, you know, once I started getting into it and rereading the book, um, you know, yeah, you do start noticing. And I was looking for the foreshadowing and so on, but like with Cersei, one thing I I did like was that she wasn't likable and immediately, you know, what she did to Lady, having Lady killed. Um, but at the same time, he slipped a little bit of justification in there when, you know, as soon as he gets to Winterfell, he wants to go straight to the crypts to see Lyanna. And of course, we don't know what that means or what the ramifications are in the beginning. But as you read through the entire book and then kind of think back, it's like, well, he always was kind of, you know, an ass. So, not to kick things off too early with how we think, but so yeah, that's I think that's what I like about it. It does take, I think, a reread to really start thinking about what he's really saying about the characters.
Hmm.
Yeah, I
Great
agree.
characterization.
I remember the first time around that I liked the Starks a lot more than now. Like both Ned Stark as Robert Baratheon felt more like the heroes when I was reading it
Yes.
when I was younger. While now I dislike them sometimes as well. Especially Robert, I think is a horrible person. And then
Yes.
Ned puts way too much faith in Robert because, like Lila said, at a certain time Robert says, "I want to go to the crypt straight away," and Ned remarks, "This is why I love him so much." While yes, it's your sister, but you do know that he's been married to another woman for 14 years, and that is extremely disrespectful. So I dislike both of them a lot more on a reread, and I don't remember thinking that the first time around.
I think it speaks a lot to how fantasy has changed from when I first read it just before the TV series to now. Because back, I think in those days, the Ned character was the very virtuous. Like most fantasy heroes were completely virtuous, and you know that was the kind of badge of honor, which meant that they were going to win out in the end. Which I think is also why the end of the book works so well, because they literally cut that off at the head and say, actually, this book's going to be very, very different. But whereas I think now, I think we want our characters to have a bit more of a shade of grey, you know, not just be as absolute and always do the right thing and kind of that thing in that, because Game of Thrones has basically told us that will get you killed if you just stick like that. So I totally agree, Yolene. I find frustration with Ned now that I'm pretty sure was never there beforehand.
Hmm. Yeah, I found Ned very boring in the books. Um, just too righteous, too boring. Robert just, yeah, he was an ass, you know. But that was all right, you know, being the king and being in that position. I love Tyrion from the start in the books. Tyrion,
Mhm.
the Hound, Arya. I thought both in the book and the series, I thought was a bit too much. Really pushed the tomboy girl a bit too far. She was too young, I think. I don't know. It still rubs me a bit the wrong way as I was reading, especially knowing what comes after. I don't know. It took me a while to like all the characters, even though they were very well characterized. What really dragged me into the book was the others, the what was going on in the north, in the dragons, and I love that all that intrigue was going on, everyone, you know, at each other's throats, and never mind what's happening in the north, you know, the dead are rising. That's not important. I love that aspect of it. That was the thing that pulled me through the whole book, and eventually I warmed up to the characters, but that was the clever bit for me.
Mm-hmm.
Just never mind the rest. Just focus on petty things and then getting your throne. Never mind. Everything's fine.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that this is a world where nobody believes in magic, because that's very realistic as well.
But they still know that it's real. Yeah.
Yeah.
They don't believe it. They
Yeah,
know
but
it's real, and they don't care that much.
Exactly. And the further they get
Really.
away from the north towards the south, it's like, oh, those silly people who still believe in it, while it's there. And even if you don't believe that it's still there, it has been only a century ago. So that disbelieving, I find very interesting to read about.
Yeah, that's something that really came through in the books compared to the TV show. And this one is actually how the Starks and the North are very much tied in the old gods, and they keep on going to the trees. They go revisit it there to almost meditate on what's just happened to that kind of stuff. Whereas I don't really think I got a sense of that in the book, that there was a mystical versus kind of like more modernish society by the time you get to King's Landing, by the time you get down there. So that was interesting. And then also, one of the things I was really looking forward to in the book was actually seeing how the family trees really fit together. Knowing a bit more about the characters, going back in and watching it the second time. So they are related to them, or they are a ward of, and how the families kind of see power as in when they link together and join together. They even realize that from the very start, because that whole economy of marriages and all that kind of stuff has already been set up very clearly.
Mm-hmm. And I think you mentioned the Crips and Lyanna, they leaned in a lot heavier about that interaction with Ned and Lyanna at the end of her life, about making the promise. That was in the forefront of Ned's character, and that I don't think it was really mentioned a whole lot, if not until much later in the TV show. So that was an interesting. Maybe they thought that was too much of a tease for something that wouldn't pay off until 5 years later. But I thought that was interesting, that it was very much in the forefront of Ned's character. That was something that drove him.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm trying to remember. I'm sorry, maybe there's a lag, but I'm trying to remember. I think Ned made another promise. What was the other promise Ned made? He promised Lyanna, but then was it Robert? Where Robert said, "Promise me," and Ned said, I think it was when Robert was dying, and Ned said something about "promise me." And I've always wondered if there's some parallel there that I've missed, and maybe I need to look at that again.
Yeah, I think the promise was something like, promise me that you'll look after the kingdom until my heir is ready, or something like that. And he didn't name Joffrey at that stage, although that's who he was talking about. But Ned interpreted it the other way, of course.
Yeah.
What point were you gonna make, Suzanne?
Oh, I don't know if it's too soon to get into those spoilers of Jon Snow and Lyanna, but from the first time that I read the books, I always had that suspicion. I mean, it was more than suspicion. It felt almost so obvious, especially when they were talking the way that Ragnar treated Lyanna during the tournament, or something like that, and everything they said about him. So it was basically just Ned and Robert's word saying that he kidnapped her and raped her. And I always saw that as a sort of a Ellen of Troy situation going on, that maybe she wasn't kidnapped. And the whole thing with Ned's character and having a bastard, it didn't fit. It was, everything fitted so well. Every character was so well done, and that never fit. And I couldn't understand at the time. I was like, why can't you see? They're making it so obvious. So maybe I'm being a fool for thinking that it's so obvious, and they're making a mystery out of it. And yeah, well done.
I think that's a great point. And I think one reason why might be that, when the first time I read it, I was looking for those familiar tropes,
Mm-hmm.
but then he plays against those, and everything is great. And so I think sometimes, I was, and probably still am, running along certain tropes that actually he's pulling something else. And One thing that did strike me though was how intentionally we were to make that parallel between Arya and Lyanna. And Arya is headstrong and won't listen, to anyone. And so I think by inference, we can assume that Lyanna was similar.
Yeah.
It struck me that it was one of those cases that history is often written by the victor. So the story of what happened to Lyanna came from the fact that Robert won the war, and then could tell the story, and then that was going to be canon going forward. But they also refer to the fact that that Ned's character, that he was virtuous, etc. But of course, he fathered a bastard, so maybe he wasn't all that virtuous. They must have said that 3 or 4 times by different characters right the way through the book. So to Susanna's point, it was like almost like, you don't believe this, do you? This isn't actually a thing. I'm kind of reminded because it did stick out. Yeah, indeed.
Yeah, upon a reread, it is definitely much more clear, but I think that that's also where fantasy has evolved over the years, because I think that this was written in the 90s. So of course now we're much more used to those subverting the tropes. But I think that this is also why upon a reread I dislike Ned even more. Like, knowing what we know, and that he's all high and mighty, and I put honor in front of everything, but he is still defending Robert. And that's something that I just cannot understand. He really pushes Cersei into a corner, and I'm not defending Cersei. Well, I am defending Cersei here. I think that she is a horrible person, but what was she supposed to do? Is there anything that she could have done that would, at that point, avoided war? I don't think so. So that's where Ned is pushing the situation. And I cannot defend that.
I hate to make this comparison, Steve, but I think Ned has some qualities of who are we talking about yesterday on the expansion?
Amos or Holden?
Holden, where he goes into that whole situation thinking honor is going to solve everything. He approaches Cersei and tells her he knows, and just assumes that her honor will make her pack up and leave. And it was also kind of patriarchal too, or not even kind of, it was patriarchal, that you have sinned, so you need to go, where he has supposedly a reputation for siring a bastard too. So I think it's about, he's operating on this structure, and the structure just doesn't fit where he is, and it's his downfall. So he's not a political person.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
But he also makes decisions. Oh, sorry, go ahead, John.
I was just going to say that he also doesn't really think things through, because even if Cersei would say, okay, I'm going to pack up and leave, what is Robert going to think? She needs to either say, yes, these aren't bastards, and Robert is not going to just sit down and say, okay, and Tywin is also not going to do that. So even if she makes that decision, as a woman, she doesn't really have a say about what's going to happen next. So Ned doesn't really think things through at all.
Yeah.
No.
It was a little surprising that he seems so naive after all that he's been through. It seemed just considering that he thinks that she's just going to say, you know what, you're right, you got me, I'll leave now. It's like, that's not going to happen. I mean, he just seems a little naive in I don't know. But he is very much like Holden. That's a good comparison of thinking honor will win the day when there really is no structure. It's all an illusion. The structure is just, it's someone behind the curtain. There is really no structure. It's just power and influence.
Yeah. And up till now, women normally do what they're expected to do. Catelyn married him when Brandon died. Sansa's going to marry the prince, and they're trying to talk Arya into, following that too. But he assumes that Arya will eventually follow that path. So I think it's an assumption. I think GRRM is allowing Ned to have those assumptions that women have a certain place, and therefore she's going to skulk off. Shame. And yeah.
He is the product of that world, of that society. So he follows the rules of that world. No, it wasn't that much of a personal sacrifice to his honor to say that he sired the bastard, because that was common for men, So maybe that's it. If it follows the rules of the world a bit too strictly, and another thing to keep in mind with some of the characters, Cersei, for example, they also are the product of that world. The game, so to speak, is rigged against women in that world. So they have to be creative to get ahead, to get what they want. Dany is another example of that. She played her hand very well, managing. She was put in this impossible situation, being sold as a slave, so young, absolutely no control over her fate, over her life, and she took that control, by using the strengths that she had as a woman. So it's yeah, characters are always the product of the environment they are in. It's very important to take that into consideration when you create your world. You can't just have a character that has just nothing in common. He's just a rebel to the bone. But you even ask how it was raised here. It doesn't fit. I think everyone fits that world pretty well, and that's why it's amazing. I mean, it's a great story.
Yeah.
It's a great
Female
point.
characters are much more multi-layered than the male characters, I think, in general. I mean, they show the men are either honorable, good men, or they are insipid and untrusting, and scheming. Whereas the women, you get much more levels to it. Even from like Arya's character is very much the tomboy, but actually is on a thing for personal growth, if nothing else. Where Sansa's completely not. She just wants to play the roles of Sally. But you've also got Lisa, who is the character that's showing, like, I would say, traditional fantasy, and even classical English literature would have said the kind of craven shrew. When their husband dies, that she recoils into herself to protect the family and knock everything down. She's very much that character. So you get all these different levels of character from the female side, whereas the men are very much kind of fall into archetypes.
Yeah.
Good point. And it kind of leads up to Esme's comment about, I love Jason Momoa, so that's why I liked Khal Drogo, but he didn't really do much for me in the book. And I agree with that. He seemed very, very flat and one-dimensional in the book. And where in the show, he pops off the screen because of the performance. But and that kind of leads into Dany. I think her character is a lot more interesting, and she seemed a lot more like strong-willed, or like she was a lot more intriguing in the book than she was in the show. To start off with,
I
anyway.
agree
She gets more interesting later, but in the beginning she seemed very, I don't know, it was very, like she was off in the corner, but in the book she seems to have a presence.
She just has a very rich inner life. And the Drogo, I mean, we don't have a point of view. I mean, we don't know, what he was thinking. So it's a shame. In the books, we only have her perspective of him. So that is one of the limitations of books. Of course, in television, they have so much more to work with. They can show us a lot more of the characters, and I think they did pretty well. Another great casting choice.
Yeah, I agree completely. I also think that it was a great decision to age up the characters, even though in future books it does make them do stupid things that, if you remember that they're actually 14 years of age, it's realistic, the choices that they make. But at the same time, for certain things that should happen on screen, I think that it's good that they age them up. But Dany as a character in the books, she was much more ruthless. I felt she was much more in control early on. For example, you have that scene with Viserys, her brother, who tries to defy her because she commanded the Khalasar to stop. And in the TV show, she's still afraid of him, while in the book she makes him walk, which is the biggest shame that you could have as a Dothraki. So I really like that from the beginning she tried to take power once she was a Khaleesi.
Yes.
Yeah, and she even could see through Illyrio, I think, more than Viserys. So she is a political person.
Yes, right from the start. A bit too young, but yeah, a character very rich in her life. Very, very clever. The way that she developed and just took control. But then there's also the mysticism attached to her character specifically. You know, she always had those dreams and those impressions with the eggs. You kind of you gave her some almost a supernatural strength that everything is justified in the end. Okay, she wasn't just this child prodigy. There was something there within her from the beginning, and you know, it is fantasy after all. So it all makes sense.
That reminds me of John in the book.
Mm.
In the beginning, he's much more everything than we see in the show. I think in the show he's depicted as earnest and does have his anger, but we see him drinking, talking to Tyrion, making,
It's a bit less innocent.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And she always has the best questions. But one thing I'd love to discuss, an aspect of both Cersei and Caitlyn's personalities is they are fiercely protective mothers. What are some fundamental differences or similarities in their approaches?
Oh, good question.
Great question. Yeah.
There aren't many. They both would do anything to protect their children. We can say that one is in the right and the other is in the wrong because, Cersei's children are illegitimate. Catelyn's. That's neither here nor there. As mothers, they are both quite fierce. I don't know if you just put them together in a room and see what's what. I don't know who would win.
They both have very set views on who their family is as well. Like obviously, Cersei.
They would do anything.
Yeah, Cersei had the children with Jaime, so to her, Jaime, her and the kids are the family, and Robert is very much on the outside, and she's very much dismissive of him in the same way that Caitlyn is of Jon. I mean, the relationship between her, how cold she is with Jon, I think, is one of the most stark things from the start of the book. Obviously with reason, but actually given how she is around the rest of her family and the people that are around them, even to a certain degree, even Theon, that Jon was not to be discussed. Even being in the same room as her was seen as a problem.
Mm-hmm. No, she has a dark side, definitely. And we'll see that in the books later on, which was a shame that they didn't add it to the show. So we'll see.
They both know how to work with the structure. They both have that political side. And did we lose Steve? Oh, there he is. Yeah. And, I think they're both willing to kill because look at everything Catelyn did with Tyrion and then later Jaime. So I think they're more alike than not.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think there's really nice contrast by the end, and again, we don't see Cersei's point of view in this book at all.
Yeah.
I don't think, but Catelyn understands that maybe she caused some of the problems by abducting Tyrion at the point and actually setting in place a chain of events that actually led to her husband being killed. And actually she's aware that actually she had a responsibility in that, whereas we don't see that from nearly Cersei's point of view, only sort of through Tywin when at the end when Jaime gets abducted and he says, God damn, this is Joffrey's fault, but actually Cersei created that situation as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I also think that Kat is very lucky in the situation that she's in. She has a husband who is extremely supportive, and the one misstep that he ever did is something that she is still extremely angry about, and she takes it out on the poor boy who has not done anything wrong towards her. While Cersei, yes, she is extremely vindictive towards Robert, but at least he's at fault. And I think that she has grown to be that way living in King's Landing, which is basically a viper's nest. While Catelyn was very secluded in the north, she was protected in the north, and she was fine there. You can see when she leaves, she makes some very big mistakes. And I think that you will see her progression throughout the book where she might become more like Cersei.
And
Do you think? Oh, I'm sorry. Just a follow up, because I was thinking Catelyn does love Ned. Do you think Cersei loves Jamie, or is it a? Well, she loves him as a brother, but I was trying to think, who does Cersei love other than her children?
oh,
Herself. I think more from the show than the books. I have to read the next books, but in her own way, I think yes, she loves Jamie, but again, it's in her own way. It's a very selfish kind of love, very based on what can you give me, what protection. So yes, you always have, when you talk about love, you always have to take into consideration the character's definition of love, not ours exactly. So I guess maybe in her mind, yeah, she probably loves Jamie, but it's very conditional.
Great point.
it almost seems like a business transaction. It didn't seem like there was any. There was really nothing. There's the emotional portion wasn't really there. It was just more of a like a need to do.
A
not
need,
want to do.
exactly.
Yeah.
But it is such an interesting point because it is sort of a loveless world. There is very little love throughout the entire story. You know, everything, as Sam just pointed out, is transactional insofar as by taking on this partner or having this baby, you are fulfilling a need within society. It's the kind of highborn element of keeping a stability of the class system, so to speak, in that world by siring babies, forming partnerships, and all that kind of stuff. But nobody actually, there's very little love in the world, which I think sort of plays into what happens with the revelations further down the book, and that actually some things were born out of love and etc. So
That's a great point. Esme had a question. What was everyone's favorite POVs to read? I personally connected the most to Arya, Jon, and Tyrion.
Tyrion, his wit is great.
I would agree with those three, but they are also the three most likable characters to me, certainly at least. You know, the ones. I think Jon, especially, I liked his point of view because of the setting that he was in. I think the Night Watch as a setting was really interesting to read about. It had its own set of mini politics and its own set of mini rules that made that really interesting, and how the relationship between Sir Alistair Thorne and even Mormont, etc. You know, when they take ownership of different people within it. It was much more interesting than certainly some of the things that were happening around the middle of the country at that time, certainly politically. But Tyrion's interesting because I think in the show he was seen as much more slovenly and slobbish throughout the first series or the first season. You know, as like this very smart but actually extremely flawed, whereas his wit, etc., is very on point from the very first moment in the book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I also really enjoyed Dany's perspective, just because it's also, at a completely different part of the world. And even though I don't think that she has a lot of POVs throughout the book, but everyone that she has is very important.
What about you, Layla?
I'd agree with all four of those because all of them are outliers in some way, and so that type of character is always the most interesting, I think, because you know that okay, there's going to be some kind of action that happens to these characters, or they're going to be a catalyst for something, and for the reasons you all said. So, but then surprisingly, like you think Ned, I would think Ned would make it through the whole book, and he's like the stable father with all this chaos going on. and then he's the first to die. But I really wasn't interested in his POV at all, so it was just really a great shock. It was good.
I'm gonna contradict myself a little bit because I think Caitlin was a lot meaner and nastier in the book than she was in the show, and you do see the way that she kind of shuns John a little bit in the show. It's subtle, but it's there. But she's a lot more upfront with it in the book, and I thought she was one of my favorite characters in this one. Just imagine being left in that situation when everyone leaves and you're there and they're trying to assassinate your son, and you know you're trying to maneuver and you're trying to figure out who pushed him or who hurt him, who's trying to kill him, why are they trying to do this. It's someone that, you know, as in her position to be in that, to have to solve all these problems suddenly that she didn't necessarily have to solve before. I thought was really interesting, and I love that that kind of hopeless figuring it out as you go kind of feeling that she has. And this, she doesn't always make the right decisions, but you would think you make those kind of emotional decisions in that position. You don't really think things through. When she takes, when she takes Jamie or Tyrion, she's acting out of impulse and trying to do the best she can in that situation. So I thought she was one of the most interesting characters for me in this one. She didn't really in the show wasn't really that much of a not as interesting, but I thought she was much more interesting in the book.
And her role in society and how much power she has because of her lineage is much more prevalent in the book as well. You know, but she can walk into your room and go, "I am Catelyn Tully. You know, this is where I come from." People go, "Oh, yes, indeed." So she can go around the world and have real influence rather than just being the wife of, Ned or whatever it is. You know, she's certainly, I would say, on equal footing at Ned in terms of power within the world, which is an interesting dynamic as well.
Is she even smarter than Ned in those? In that, I mean, yeah. Hello, Chadia.
Hey.
Hello.
The White Walkers too, where they seemed scarier in the book. They had a more of a presence in the book, I thought too, in this first one.
It's hard not to visualize the TV series with what happened in the book and kind of fill it, your mind sort of fill in the gaps, especially the first scene where you're kind of going around. And I mean, I must have seen that scene itself in the TV show so many times, but actually to kind of feel the sense of dread and kind of think, well, they were expecting one thing, but it was actually another. And it was only when they brought the bodies back to Night Watch that you kind of, as a reader, you sort of know what's going to happen, but they're kind of oblivious to it. I think that was a really nice bit of suspense, even upon a reread.
You know, putting 2 and 2 together now with Fire and Blood and John being on the wall and the wall being so undermanned, I think it makes me wonder, I guess, if Ned was aware of the true purpose of the wall or not. I don't know if we see that yet in this book. But I've always questioned why he executed the deserter from the Night's Watch, because I can't remember in the book, I don't think it says if the person explained why he was deserting. There was no conversation or discussion. So I've always wondered, did Ned know why he was running and really wanted to keep him quiet?
I don't think it said.
I'm going to look. Yeah, I meant.
I'm pretty sure he doesn't. I think he just punishes him. You know, it's very much in the book set as a ritual. Oh, we found somebody that deserted. This is what happens men who desert. And then
it was just carrying the sentence. But there's a point. I mean, he must have talked to someone, about what he saw, what he thought he saw. Someone. must have paid attention. But then again, if they did, it will be a completely different story now. Some things sometimes have to happen so the plot can go a certain direction.
Yeah.
If
But I
they had
also-
all
I don't think
believed
that
and
it's-
marched north, then that was it. Nothing else happened.
Go, Yolene. You go first.
I was watching you. No, I don't think it's said specifically, but I do remember Bran being there for the first time. And there is a conversation where he asks Ned, like, are you calling him a liar then? And I think that Ned says something along the lines of, well, when people are scared, they sometimes believe something that's not true.
Mm.
So it's not said specifically that he talked about the White Walkers, but I do think that off screen it's implied that he said something like that and that they didn't believe him, or that they did believe him, but still the sentence need to be done because otherwise other people are going to be afraid and mass panic is starting to happen. But I do think that it was implied that he told them.
Good point.
I just think it's interesting that for all of the Starks kind of espousing of the old gods, etc., actual practical and real implications of that are not considered. You know, in the world, it's kind of what was said at the very start that actually there is no magic in the world, but we sort of do believe in the mysticism and the religion that was set beforehand. So they kind of have this disconnect between tradition and actually what they think is practically true.
Yeah, and
Esme,
it also.
I'm sorry, Yolene. Go ahead.
No, I just wanted to ask, even if they believe it, like let's say that Ned believes it, it's still the duty of the Night Watch to, even if White Walkers come, they shouldn't desert. So still he was a deserter and he should be punished for that in that world.
No space for dealing with trauma in this world, none at all.
Before I get to Esme's comment, I just want to mention in the beginning of the book that when they find the dire wolves, that was that whole thing was because they talk about how it was a sign, and Caitlin right away is like, this is a bad omen. I don't think they really played that too much in the show, which surprised me a little bit because that would have been a nice kind of omen in the show too. But it was more in the forefront in the book, that the dire wolves and the meaning that they had.
True. Maybe it was giving
Yeah,
away
I
too much
think-
too soon.
I think that it's even implied when Ned goes to, well, when he's asked to become the Hand of the King and he goes to King's Landing, I think that she thinks back, Kat, about the direwolf and how it was killed by, it's not a stag, but something like that, right?
Yeah, I forget the name. Yeah, it was like a stag, basically.
I happened to watch the Alt Shift X of season 1, episode 1, back last night when I finished
Same.
the book, and it was very much there's a dead direwolf and a dead stag, which represents basically Ned and Robert by the end of the book, so to speak. So all those portents were there.
And Esme's comment, I thought I would love Danny's chapters the most, but the essay on violence in the Dothraki culture really caught me off guard and was hard to read.
Nice.
Yeah, it's those.
Yeah.
There's some. Yeah.
But also
Especially-
not. Go
Go
ahead.
ahead. Now it's your turn. It's your turn this time.
Okay, I'll go this time. Now I have to remember what I was going to say. I was going to say, again, another sign of the time that's passed between the sexual assault, which I remember from reading it the first time, was like very shocking. And actually reading it this time, it was only sort of shocking, if you know what I mean. I think the kind of temperance for what we consider to be, shocking, I think has changed in the intervening period. For me, anyway.
Yeah, I agree. And after a while, you know what was going to happen, so you brace yourself beforehand, and then it's like, okay, yes, this is it. I was even imagining worse. But I think I kept aging them up in the book because I know the show and I have those characters in my head, and I kept thinking, no, Dany is actually 13, and after a while, when she's pregnant, she's 14. So she's not Dany in the TV show, and even though SA against adults is just as bad, but it really shocks you when it's a young girl and when it's seen as normal. Something that I well, this is a minor complaint, but I didn't really like it, is that after a while, well, it's said that Danny basically gets assaulted every night, and then
Mhm.
after a while, she grows to like it, which is
Mm.
extremely unrealistic. And maybe you can see it in light of the dreams that she was starting to have, and she starts dreaming about the dragon, and that changes her completely. But still, I found it a little bit iffy, and maybe thinking about that it was written in the 90s, he still did a great job with women, but that I didn't really like.
But the whole, well, wedding night scene in the books plays very differently to some degree than it happens in the series. I was a bit not shocked, but I was surprised that they did what they did in the series, because I was like, well, no, this is not at all how it happens. Um, but and I still question why they went that direction, if it was just for the shock value, or yeah, I don't know. It's very different in the books, and it's more consistent with how she then learns to take control over situation, even sexually. So yeah,
I think that
in the series was such a shift. I was a little bit less consistent.
Mhm.
yeah, I agree. Something I want to bring up though is I think we see it more because it's Danny's POV, but at the same time, you have, Ned assuming Leanna's going to marry Robert, who she doesn't want to marry, serial womanizer. You have brothels all over the place where women are, abused and used. And so to me, I think it's a comparative of in either culture, women are going to have the, you know, uh, a lesser, a, I don't want to say a lesser role. Yes, a lesser role, but more potential for abuse of women in both cultures, but it's just done differently. And we're not getting the POVs of the women that Robert is siring bastards with,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
and the women in the brothels and so on.
It's interesting how memory works because I remember watching TV show and thinking kind of similarly to what you said there, Susanna, that the taming of Khal Drogo by Danny was very rushed, etc. in the TV show. But in my head, actually, that whole period of Danny's going from sexual assault to then being in control of the situation went over a much longer period in the books. It kind of went over chapters and chapters and chapters, where it basically happens within a few paragraphs,
It made
between the
sense.
dream. Yeah,
Mhm.
and that kind of thing. So I remember being very even more annoyed at the show for kind of cutting a lot of this out. But when I went back to read it, it still wasn't there. And I think a part of that was probably me reading that book thinking this is a 13, 14-year-old girl, and me kind of filling in the gaps for her and projecting myself into the character. But I also just have an issue with the amount of male authors that have to sexually assault their female characters for them to be strong afterwards. I just think we can do better. We can do better with that. That just happens far too often, and especially in fantasy. And
Yeah,
it doesn't need to happen. Danny was strong beforehand.
They are
But
emotionally abused as well.
Yeah.
So there's all sorts of abused, and I guess that's why there's such strong characters. But if I don't know, from my perspective, everyone is like, oh, sexual abuse. Being forced to marry someone just to bear their children. It doesn't matter, how consensual the sexual intercourse is going to be. It's still, I find that horrific. And not having a say in your life, not having an opinion, just yeah. But again, it is the world, and it is a trope in fantasy, and then you get the characters, the mothers, the rebels, the outliers. They all went through that because it is part of their culture, so it kind of makes sense. It does get a bit old, true. But human nature, it's been the same for thousands and thousands of years.
Yeah.
There's that too. How much can you innovate or create on top? Let's see. I digress. I'm in science fiction right now. No, there's no point.
I think it's important to point out that Ned would have Ned supported Leanna marrying Robert when she didn't want to marry him,
and she knew he was a womanizer, and he was fine with that. Again,
and she had no.
I remember that part in the book, and I was like, no.
Yeah, and no attraction to him, and sometimes it seems like that's okay.
It's still abuse.
But it's still abuse. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Leanna rebelled against that. And so that's a significant thing.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that's part of the reason why he let Arya then explore the training with the sword, where he just very quickly relented? He obviously identifies Lyanna with Arya very, very closely.
Mm-hmm.
He says, no, you can go train and I'll get somebody get good in to teach you how to defend yourself, etc. very early in the books, and kind of says, like, you may end up down this path, but you can certainly explore this part of yourself.
Yes, I think so. But there's also the fact that Arya was still a child. I'm pretty sure once she reached puberty, the sword lessons would stop.
Mm-hmm.
So the combination of the two. I mean, he was a good father. He was trying to redeem himself, maybe trying to make her happy because she was so unhappy in King's Landing, away from everything she loved. So okay, you can play with your sword for now. There's no harm. Eventually that will end.
Yeah.
Well, Walking with Books had a great comment. For me, this book shows what can happen when a big baddie, Aerys Targaryen, is defeated, and what will happen in the scheming for those who get in power and how to gain more power. That power vacuum and who's trying to fill it. And it just it keeps happening because we keep having these power vacuums over and over again, and just different people trying to fill that void.
Yeah, exactly. I think it also shows that a great war leader, that Robert obviously was, does not make a great king per se. But somehow that strength and that power is seen as, okay, you're the one with the most strength, you're the warrior, so naturally you should lead us, which is not logical at all.
It's nearly exactly the conversation we had last night about The Expanse too. It's funny how this often plays out in fiction or reality.
Yeah.
Yeah, the people who gain power aren't necessarily people that should be ruling or can rule. Cersei's relationship and cruelty of Robert's bastards are that of a threat to her power, and Caitlin sees Ned's bastards as a threat to her love and her love and family, both very cruel to their husbands' bastards.
Great.
Yes, agree.
Oh, Esme had to run, but thanks for coming by, Esme. Paramita, I thought for the panel, Dany also becomes a mother at the end of book 1. How much of those central themes and the various manifestations of motherhood conflicted with power? Another great question.
How much of one of the central themes is the various manifestations? Oh, okay.
So, I mean, it's pretty clear to me that Dany's sort of insane from the first book. In some way, she does an awful lot of justification and talking to herself very, very early on, in that kind of I am these things. And as the book goes on, she adds another kind of moniker to her name. It's almost giving herself nicknames as she goes along, as she achieves and does things going along. And kind of the motherhood and the things that she does in losing her baby, then giving birth to these dragons in some sort of way, it sort of is the justification or the realization that okay, then these must all be true. It's literally like self-fulfilling prophecy.
I think motherhood brought Dany into her power, even though she lost Rhaego, because she became the mother of dragons. But for Catelyn and Cersei both, I think it ultimately weakened them.
True.
but just as an aside, the point, she has, Chris, she has these self affirmations, and
That's
it kind of reminds you of that Saturday Night Live skit where the guy's like in front of the mirror going, people like me. I'm the mother of dragons. People like me. Um, so I saw those as kind of like affirmations to keep herself, to like help her mental state too, as well.
Mm.
Good stuff. Aaron had a comment. Cersei talks in the book about her and Jaime being one person. She seems more in love with him in the book than in the show to me, but that may evolve as she gets more power. It's true.
I think you can't really help but love your twin, just in a non-romantic way. And after what happened with Robert, she was probably having a twisted sense of I need to find some kind of love somewhere, and Jamie is the only person that I feel that comfortable with, which is probably because she never really had that sense of love with anybody else. So it's definitely twisted, but I think that in her mind, well, I think that she loves him as a twin, and that in her mind she started to love him in a more romantic way, as a sort of self-protection, maybe.
Yeah, it's the back to that selfish love, that self-esteem. I think it's Tyrion that says when they are having breakfast together in Winterfell after Bran fell, and he wonders what Jaime sees in her, and he says something like, "Besides his own reflection," because they look so alike. So what we see in her besides his own reflection, it's that sort of love. Possessive, self-centered, that need. So that's why they see themselves as one person, but it is very selfish love
Oh, I love that
for
idea.
both of them as well, because he is very possessive of her. But I think he loves her more than she loves him. That's just my personal opinion.
And Parmitha, okay, the burning question I always ask: dragons or direwolves? Dragons, of course, right?
Oh,
Dire wolves.
that was
wow.
me. Yeah.
Really? Wow, I'm surprised.
Yeah.
in the real world, I love dogs, but I guess I'll go with dragons. Oh, it's tough. It's tough to say.
I like both, but I confess I'm a bit saturated with dragons. So I would like to see more dire wolves.
Yolene, you have to be pro dragon, right? Or am I? Or are you direwolf?
I am pro dragon. In the first book, I would say pro direwolf, just because we don't really see a lot of the dragons. But over
true.
time, I'd much rather have a dragon than a direwolf.
Yeah.
You can fly. You can
Yeah.
beat that.
Exactly.
Yeah, you can do a lot with the dragon. I would argue that Cersei loves her children, but they are more of a vehicle for her to gain power, because the world doesn't allow for her to be in power, so she needs them for that.
Nice point.
Aaron, I
I'm
wonder how
pro
Cersei and
Cersei.
Rob.
I'm sorry. Sorry, I feel like
No, go ahead.
I feel like I need to defend Cersei the entire time. I can see that she's a horrible person towards others, but I really do think that she loves her children. And I think that
Yeah.
I don't know if that's a book comment or a TV show comment, to be honest, and I don't know if that's in the first book or later, but she does mention that a mother does not really have any say in whether or not she loves her children. She says that love is something that makes you um, not strong.
Weak.
Weak, yes. So you should love as low amount for people as possible, just to be as strong. But then she says, but as a mother, you have no choice. You will love your children, even if you see that they are horrible human beings. You love them either way. So I do think that she really loves them, but that everything around her has made her horrible and vindictive because everybody around her is that way. She has like Littlefinger around her. She has Varys. She has all of these snakes. That of course she's going to be just the same, but I don't think that she's as horrible from the get-go. And I think that it's more her surroundings that made her that way. But I don't really see her as the villain.
I love Cersei's character, though. Aaron commented, "I wonder how Cersei and Robert's marriage would have been if If there had been no Lyanna or Jaime, it seems she was committed to the marriage before Robert said Lyanna's name.
Yeah, I think
it wouldn't have worked. Go on.
no, go ahead. I think we're going to say similar things.
No, I was just going to say it wouldn't have worked because Robert was such a womanizer. He would not, change. He would still sire a bunch of bastards, and Cersei would still be a narcissist. And I think it would still collapse.
Yeah, and there's the story that Tywin had tried to match Cersei with Rhaegar, and that is in the back of Cersei's mind always. But I think they could have had a stable partnership, is too good of a word, except for the issue of Lyanna, which brought in Ned eventually, because they were best friends. And so, but I still think she would have been Cersei in one way or another.
Brenny, I always enjoyed Tyrion's POV because of the fact that he is well read. You get stories and histories of the world. On a reread, I picked up more of that.
Great point.
This week's distraught at Bran's side didn't ring true for me. I imagine she would be a stranger and think of Rob and Rickon, but I'm not a parent who has dealt with a sick child. There was a lot more in with the Raven, the three-eyed Raven, and his dreams too in the book than were in the show.
And hinted at that Rickon is sort of having similar dreams or apparitions as well, given that they find him down in the crypts when his father's coming home.
Right. I think it makes sense to some extent about Catelyn focusing on Bran. Well, first of all, it says something about Catelyn as a personality because she obsesses over things, like she's obsessing over Jon. And so I think it works.
Parmitha assumed the show didn't exist. Did everyone feel the writing had certain cinematic appeal anyway, as if it were meant to be translated into an audiovisual medium in some form?
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
Yeah, I was gonna say I think the whole genre fits that kind of description in some ways. That obviously when I remember reading the book the first time and going, this is perfect for a TV show, and then they announced it, and I was like, well, this is great because this should translate very well and should be very successful. I think it was obvious even at the early stages that this probably would be something that would take hold. But I think a lot of fantasy does that.
But didn't George R. R. Martin wrote for television for a long while before?
He did.
So there you go.
I think what makes it special, though, is that, first book, not so much, you don't really notice. But now that we've gone through all that we know, he started the book with Bran. We don't know what ultimately is really going to happen with Bran at the end of the series, but definitely he is a significant figure, in the series. Also starting off with Daenerys, who is going to be a significant figure. So I think even though it may have been written for cinematic purposes, there are a lot of details in there that couldn't make it into any show, but yet for readers are going to be a payoff at some point. So it really works on two levels.
Aaron had a comment. Knowing GRRM based it on events of the 13th century England, It was typical to be married in your teens. Perspective on age and adulthood were different as people didn't live as long. Joff and Rob, and maybe talk a lot about being a grown man soon. John and Rob,
John.
excuse me.
Yeah.
Yeah, fair enough.
Mazda's here. It's a story historically accurate, which is so disturbing but crazy. Maybe I got it wrong, but I took from Ned's perspective that Robert used to be noble, and the crown changed him into someone he didn't recognize anymore. He wasn't always this bad.
I think part of it was his role in society was as a great warrior, and as a great warrior, he was a good friend and as a good leader. And then when he wasn't asked to be that, there wasn't an awful lot else to back it up. Then there wasn't. He just wanted to drink and live in brothels and actually not abdicate the responsibility of the throne that he won.
Again, not to make a comparison, but he was the leader. He was the revolutionary leader who was a great leader, but not an administrator. As we talked about other stories.
And I think that Ned wants to believe that he's a good guy because he grew up with Robert, and then he loses his older brother, Brandon, and Robert is all that he has left. So he wants to believe that there's still something good there, and the Lannisters are just having his claws into him, and he doesn't really have a choice, but maybe if he can get through to him, things will be okay. So I think that that's also Ned's mistake, but at the other hand, I can understand why you have a childhood friend and you want to see the good in him.
And Parmitha has another thought for the panel. Excuse me. Nobody would call a Game of Thrones feminist, but is it actively misogynistic, or is it trying to show the reality of a misogynistic world? Does it get voyeuristic?
Yes, I think it shows the reality of a misogynistic world. Does it get voyeuristic? Not sure I understand the question. The series, yes, very much so. The books, I don't know. What do you think?
I think it's trying to show the reality of a misogynistic world, because I'm actually thinking back to what was it Masa just said about historical accuracy. I think Game of Thrones is actually today's world accurate in a lot of ways. I mean,
things would be a lot worse in the 13th century, I think.
It depends on where you are in the world. That's the thing, and so I think that there's still some, abuse is always going to be there, is what I'm trying to say, in one form or fashion, as well as other. But voyeuristic for the book, I don't think. I think that GRRM does take some risks, but I don't think it's overall voyeuristic.
I think the overarching theme of the books is that it's a battle between two women, up to certainly what he's written so far. Insofar as, you've got the rise of Dany, who's going to be a female leader on one side, and then you have the rise of Cersei through whatever means that she can or the world allows her at that stage, for good or for bad. So, it's an interesting perspective or take on a fantasy world, for sure.
Yeah, lots of stuff. And then this book has almost like a comfort read feel, but it also has, that you're reading a dense fantasy. It rides that line really well. It doesn't feel so dense. It feels like a comfort read almost, because it reads so easily.
True.
Which is, I'm sure it's hard to do, right? So. Another character that I thought was a little different in the book was Sansa. She was a lot less likable in the book than she was in the show.
I think you find her name is not Sansa, but Sansa. Every time I read her name, that was exactly what I went. Oh, Sansa.
So sad. I do love the relationship between her and the Hound, and I'm so sad that they didn't bring that out in the TV show as they should. I think it's
Yeah.
beautiful, especially how it develops later on. It's great. The way that she lost Lady, but she got a Hound. The whole analogy is just great.
I agree.
Oh, I didn't even catch that. Yeah, that's a good point.
Agree.
I also feel for her in a way. Yes, she is annoying, but she is what 12 maybe when she goes to King's
Yeah.
Landing. She's also
She acts
she
that
is the
age.
perfect little lady. Yeah, and
Yeah.
that's what she is supposed to do. We
Mhm.
maybe relate a little bit more to Arya, who is a tomboy and she doesn't really fit into that world, but she tries to be herself anyway. But Arya is doing what she's told to do. The Septa tells her that she's perfect and she's the good girl, and look at Arya. So of course that's how she's going to feel. Her mother is horrible towards John, and she sees him as her bastard brother. Why not? It's what she's been told by adults. So even though she is annoying, I can understand where it's coming from, and I don't really think that's her fault. I also think that throughout the books, she really has a magnificent arc, and she learns the hard way.
Yeah.
But I don't think that it's her fault the way that she is.
No.
I really agree with that. I like Sansa. You know, there's been a lot of comparison of all the different women, but I have liked Sansa because she is trying to be the good girl, the good daughter, and you know her thing about the songs that you know Joffrey is like the prince of the songs and all of that reminded me of you know how we have all these Disney princess movies, and you know, every girl is supposedly waiting for the prince, you know, and it fell into place for Sansa. So why should she question it?
Yeah, that's one of actually my favorite parts of the whole first book is when her naivete sort of starts to dissipate. You know, when she's around and she bites back for the first time to one of the sirs and says, "But you're not a true knight either." You know, and it's the first time she actually asserts her own voice, I think, in the book, or what she thinks and feels as a person. And now that she's experienced some horrible things, I think that part of the book actually is one of the most satisfying. That and Viserys getting poured, you know, covered in gold, this gold crown.
Yeah, that was done really well. I thought in the show that scene of him getting the gold poured over his head that was pretty good. And I think they nailed that scene anyway in the show.
Mm-hmm.
Pardon me. The one thing that was very interesting was the theme of legitimacy. Jon is illegitimate but loved by Ned. Tyrion is legitimate but denied by Tywin. Then we have Cersei and Jaime's children.
Yep.
But isn't it funny how Tywin's attitude to Tyrion changes just at the end when he considers that Jaime is probably dead?
Mm-hmm.
And that he certainly comes to protect him and say, "No, you go do that because that's pretty much the safer part." And Tyrion's smart enough to realize that that's exactly what's happening, rather than just kind of being the other brother.
I think Tywin moves his kids around, you know, just like game pieces, you know, and whichever one is going to serve his quest for power. So
It's a strange world, this legitimate versus illegitimate son, because it is very representative of probably 13th, 14th century England at the time. But this is also a world where they're fascinated with incest as well. I just think I find this really interesting that somebody would write so much of this into a book, as a kind of thematic idea, and continue it right the way through, even to further novels. That incest is such a large thing to be discussed or be appalled by, whatever he was going for.
you know, I think we got a pre-runner to that with Star Wars, and from some articles I've read, GRM had compared like Danny and John to, not that Danny and John are who knows what's going to happen, but he had kind of made a reference to the Star Wars uh, alliance between who is it? Princess
Luke and
Leia.
Leia. Yeah.
Luke and Leia, right? Who had a very chaste peck on the cheek or something in the first Star Wars film.
Mhm.
And so, not that that fully gave him the idea, I have no idea, but I just remember reading some article about that.
Hmm.
So
It-
maybe he took it and ran with it.
it's very common in mythology. I mean, incest, especially amongst brothers, it only became a thing, a problem recently. I try not to talk much about it. I don't have brothers or sisters, so it doesn't bother me in the slightest, as long as you're not going to have kids, you know, whatever, do whatever you want. But it's always been a thing in several mythologies, and Egyptians done it with terrible consequences, and even in Europe, you know, marrying cousins left and right. So I don't know why people are so appalled about it. I think it's like everything else in the show. It's quite accurate of this aspect of human nature, because everyone is trying to get their lineage, you know, their children to continue the houses. So it's the way that makes sense. You always want to keep everything in the family, obviously. So it when you look at it that way, it makes perfect sense. And it's only now that, you know, modern sensibilities becomes a problem, but it fits the world, it fits the story. It's not new. It didn't start with Star Wars, you know. It's very, very old.
Yeah,
Mhm.
exactly. And that's something else. I mean, in terms of cousins marrying, that still happens today. So
Yeah,
you
still
know,
happens.
Mhm.
so that's
Even worse things, but you know, it's illegal now.
right, right.
Mhm.
In yeah, in this part of the world. But there was something else about that struck me. Oh, I can't think of it now. We were talking about the cousins marrying. We were talking about Wheel of Time also has kind of a hint of that issue, because it turns out people that, not to spoil that, but people are interrelated, but they don't go there. The writer didn't go there.
Hmm.
So, maybe from a literary perspective, knowing he was reading and consuming that, maybe that's something that brought it in.
Mhm. Yeah, I find the question about legitimacy also interesting, but maybe we could do like a discussion afterwards, but with Fire and Blood, where you have at the time of the Targaryens, here we see Cersei with illegitimate children, Ned confronting her. Ned is the hero, Cersei is the big bad person. But if we look back with Rhaenyra having illegitimate children and somebody confronting her at that point, roles are reversed. It would be
Mhm.
interesting to discuss those two timelines because there's only a couple of hundred years in between, and why we have
Mhm.
such different feelings, or why people in general have so different feelings towards Rhaenyra versus Cersei. While I think that Rhaenyra had much more power to do differently, why Cersei is in a sense powerless. She had to marry
Mhm.
somebody, and that's it. But maybe after we read Fire and Blood.
Yes,
Hmm.
I have thoughts about Vanir
Same.
for another discussion.
Yeah. But it is hard to have these conversations without your brain popping off to all those other bits of the world, which kind of just it just
Exactly.
describes to how well thought out and detailed the world is.
Exactly, because if no one's, you know, completely right or completely wrong. No one's completely evil or completely good. Okay,
Yeah.
maybe Ned was almost 100% good in his own way.
Mhm.
So yeah, that's what creates a good story, and
Yeah.
that's why we're talking about it.
Mhm.
Exactly.
Definitely. So, anything else you guys wanted to bring up, or any other topics for this one? Lots to discuss in this first one.
There really is.
Yeah,
It's
the scenes with
I like
Varys and
Ross.
Peter are great.
oh, those two are so good. Yeah,
Yeah.
fantastic. But the whole book as a first book in the series, I mean, it's one of the best. Really, everything's there. Especially upon reread, everything's there. The way the characters bounce off each other, it has the yeah, the way that he just started the foundation of this gigantic world. It's just amazing work. It is one of the best, I'll say. I like it more now. So thank you for for encouraging me for this read.
Yeah,
It's been
glad
great.
you made it.
It's so well thought out that you think he kind of had all the books written before he started book one.
Well, that would be nice.
No, instead of I want to know. There's a few things I want to know that are just in the books. I'm not even going to mention the end of the series. Let's not talk about it. But there's a couple of things that were not in the series that are in the books that I need to know the end. So that's what I'm saying. I don't care about any other book series. Just that one. Please finish it.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, Yulene, you had mentioned this is your favorite series. When you read it 10 years ago, and what were your thoughts on the reread this after reading so many other fantasy books?
I was surprised to see that I liked it just as much, and I think that part of it is nostalgia probably, but I still think that it holds up so good. And I thought that upon a reread I would have forgotten a lot. I didn't. Well, of course I watched the TV show in between and stuff like that, but I still think that it's if you measure it up to fantasy books that are written today, I still think that it's one of the best ones, which if you know that it's written 30 years ago is amazing.
I agree.
Absolutely.
It's
And
almost
especially
like
the sense
a
of foreboding.
yeah. It's almost like a historical artifact rather than just another book series at this stage. A bit like Lord of the Rings has its own kind of place within fantasy, and that it's not just a novel; it's a tome of which everything else was based off from it after the fact. It was line in the sand.
What about you, Layla? What was a reread like for you?
It was great. Like I said, I paid more attention to the early chapters. I really do think he was setting some things up. So I just paid careful attention to that. But I enjoyed it.
Awesome. Well, I'm sure we'll figure out the day for book 2 after we're done, after we wrap up. But looking forward to it. We'll pick a day and we'll let everyone know. But thanks everyone for coming by and chatting with us about the book. Lots to talk about. Lots of fun topics.
Yeah.
So
Exactly.
before we sign off, Chris, where's the best place for people to find you?
You can find me on my YouTube channel at my name, or you can find me on Twitter at 7o'clock Shadow.
And Susanna, where's the best place for people to find you and your work?
My work is for sale everywhere. You can find it on Amazon. The Timelessness series. First book is Weird Gods. You can find me. I'm pretty much in every social network as Chronodendron. It's the same handle everywhere because no one is such an ugly word and no one used it. So yeah, get in touch. I always reply.
Awesome. And we are Vero friends, so it's cool that you can make it.
Yes. Oh, thank you so much for introducing me to Vero. It's my escape. When I'm loving it to just posting pictures and talk about books and movies there. It's been great.
It is a comfort platform for sure. Yeah. And Layla, where's the best place for people to find you?
Twitter at El Goshi or Baladi Magazine.
Awesome. And Yolene, where can people find you?
Either my booktube channel, so Yolene Reads, I have a Discord, and I'm also on the Page Chewing forum quite often.
Awesome. And speaking of the forum, we are having a private meetup here in a few minutes. So anyone who wants to join us, it won't be on stream, just hanging out, chatting for a few minutes. So anyone who wants to join, the link is over on the forum. So check that out. So thanks everyone for coming by and hanging out with us, and thanks everyone on the panel who made it. Really appreciate it. Appreciate your time, and it's fun to chat about books. We bring people all over the world together just to talk about books. It's pretty amazing. Blows me away every time. So thanks everyone, and we'll let everyone know when book 2 will happen, but probably sometime next month. And we will talk to everyone soon.
Thank you so much for
Bye.
having us.
Bye.